Imagine for a moment, you've survived a decade of war, watched cities burn, seen friends fall, and with victory still heavy on your shoulders, you set sail, believing you'll see your family within weeks. But days turn to months, and months to years. The stars shift above you, but the way home remains hidden. This is not just a story about a hero or monsters, or the whims of gods. It's about the pull of home, a force deeper than the sea, stronger than any storm. For as long as people have wandered the world, they have dreamed of returning to the place where they belong. Home is more than the stones of a house or the boundaries of a land. It is memory, identity, and the heartbeat of all longing. It is the light that calls us through the darkest night, and the anchor that holds us steady when the world turns wild and uncertain. In every generation, across cultures and continents, this yearning has echoed, finding its way into stories told by firelight, whispered in the hush before sleep, painted on the walls of memory and myth. For Odysseus, king of Ithaca, home is not only a place but a promise made and remade every day of his journey. When Troy fell and the ships sailed, each man imagined a swift return to the arms of those they loved, to laughter echoing in familiar halls, to the scent of earth after rain, to the gentle hush of olive trees swaying in the island breeze. Yet for Odysseus, the voyage becomes a labyrinth, each turn leading further from his beloved shores. He faces not just the rage of Poseidon or the cunning of immortals, but the very limits of his own endurance. Nights at sea bring dreams of rocky coves and winding paths, the voices of servants and the quiet wisdom of Penelope. In waking moments, surrounded by men longing for home as fiercely as he does, Odysseus carries the invisible weight of absence each wave, each sunrise, reminding him of what's been lost and what still waits for him across the endless blue. But why does this story endure, living on for thousands of years in the minds of those who hear it? Because somewhere in every heart, there is a version of Odysseus, someone who has been cast adrift, who has had to leave the known behind, who has traveled long and far, only to discover that the journey is not simply about the distance covered, but about what it takes to find your way back to yourself. The Odyssey is not just a tale of distant islands and strange enchantments. It is a map of the human soul. We recognize ourselves in the struggle to balance hope and despair, in the tension between duty and desire, in the longing for a safe harbor after the winds of life have battered us thin. The world into which Odysseus sails is already ancient, old before Homer sang his verses, older still in the echoes of oral tradition. At the very twilight of the Bronze Age, the world was both splendid and fragile. Kings ruled from palaces of stone and gold. Ships crossed the wine-dark sea, trading stories as well as goods. But beneath this glittering surface, disaster brewed. Whole civilizations teetered on the edge, great cities burning, empires collapsing, the fragile web of peace unraveling. In the chaos that followed, as the world grew dark and uncertain, stories became a way to remember not just what was lost, but what might be regained. As night falls and you settle deeper into comfort, imagine that distant world, the salt tang of the Aegean on the wind, the rhythmic creak of oars, the soft murmur of men dreaming beneath strange stars. On Ithaca, Penelope sits at her loom, weaving and unweaving, hope and sorrow entwined in every thread. Telemachus, her son, grows from boy to man in the shadow of absence, searching his own heart for the shape of the father he cannot remember. Servants tend the fields and flocks, each day passing like the last, while suitors gather in the halls, their laughter harsh, their appetites endless, the order of the house slowly coming undone. Yet, even as Ithaca changes, it waits. The stones remember the footsteps of their king. The land, though plundered and patient, holds space for his return. This is the promise of home, that it endures even as we wander, that it remains ready for us, shaped by our longing, waiting to be made whole again. And so, with the world holding its breath, Odysseus sails onward, buffeted by fate, guided by cunning, dreaming of the day when sea and sky will finally bring him back to where he truly belongs. The journey home is never simple, never swift, but in every twist and turn, It teaches us what it means to love, to hope, and to endure. So, as you lie in the quiet darkness, let yourself drift with Odysseus over moonlit waves. Feel the ancient longing that connects all travelers, and know that somewhere beyond every horizon, the light of home is always waiting steady, patient, and unchanging. High above the restless world, where the land falls away to the restless blue and mortals can only dream, a different kind of gathering takes place, beyond the touch of time, beyond the reach of ordinary fate. There, in the halls of Olympus gleaming with eternal light, the gods move through clouds and golden mists, watching the world below as one might watch the dance of flickering candle flames. They see the ambitions of kings, the struggles of families, the hopes and heartbreaks of every wandering soul, but among all the stories, one man draws their gaze, again and again, mortal, whose cunning and endurance challenge the very boundaries between men and immortals. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, adrift and longing for home, stands at the center of their debate. His story, though shaped by his own choices, is woven into the larger tapestry of divine rivalry and cosmic justice. In the vast chamber where Olympus meets the sky, Zeus sits upon his thunderous throne, eyes as deep as storm clouds, weighing the destinies of gods and mortals alike. His power is immense, but so too is his patience. He considers each petition, each plea, with a wisdom that stretches back to the dawn of the world. Around him gather the other immortals, Hera with her regal gaze, Apollo radiant as sunlight, Artemis silent as the moon, Ares restless and eager for the smell of war, Aphrodite with secrets in her smile. Yet it is Athena, wise and watchful, who rises first to speak, her heart full of compassion and admiration for the mortal who has suffered so long and wandered so far. Athena, whose thoughts are always many layers deep, sees in Odysseus a spirit like her own, restless, clever, never defeated for long. She pleads his case, reminding the assembled gods of his sacrifices, his cleverness, his devotion not only to his household, but to the laws of hospitality and piety that keep the world in order. Odysseus, she argues, is no ordinary man. He is a builder of bridges, a solver of riddles, a soul who seeks not just his own glory, but the restoration of what is right and just. But not all on Olympus are sympathetic. Far from forgetting, Poseidon's anger seethes like the depths of his ocean realm. For Odysseus blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, Poseidon's son, and wounded not only his child, but the pride of the sea god himself. It is Poseidon who stirs the waters, lashes the winds, and ensures that every step of Odysseus's journey is marked by danger and delay. As the gods debate, the balance of fate shifts and settles, sometimes imperceptibly, sometimes like a thunderclap. For all their power, the gods are not immune to rivalry, jealousy, or the need to prove themselves in the world of men. Their disagreements echo down into the mortal realm as storms, chances, sudden turns of luck, or misfortune. Sometimes their guidance is gently a whisper of wisdom, a favorable breeze, a dream that hints at hope. At other times, their intervention is dramatic and inescapable, a great wave rising from nowhere, a shipwreck in the dead of night, a miracle at the moment when all seems lost. Even in their endless lives, the gods are fascinated by mortals like Odysseus be, their courage, their cleverness, their heartbreaking frailty. It is in the struggles of those who endure suffering and yet keep striving that the gods glimpse something rare and precious, a kind of beauty born only from longing and limitation. Zeus, for all his distance and power, respects those who honor the boundaries between mortal and divine, who understand that life is sacred precisely because it is fleeting and uncertain. When Athena speaks, she does not ask for a free gift or a simple path home for Odysseus. Instead, she asks for the chance for him to prove himself through trial and effort, to earn his homecoming and the peace that follows. Elsewhere, in the quiet corners of Olympus, other gods make their own calculations and bargains, weaving subtle threads into the fabric of destiny. Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger, prepares to carry words that will shift the world below. Even the distant, indifferent gods, those who rule over time, memory, and the seasons turn their eyes for a moment to the plight of a single man who has become a legend to his people and a puzzle to the immortals. Each god and goddess, each spirit of river and tree, each whisper of fate holds a piece of Odysseus's story. Some urge him onward, others seek to keep him wandering, but all are drawn, for reasons of their own, to the unfolding journey. And so, while Odysseus himself lies asleep in a distant cave, or watches the stars from the deck of a battered ship, his fate is shaped by hands both seen and unseen. His longing for home is matched only by the attention of the immortals, who see in his struggle a reflection of their own ancient dramas and timeless desires. The gods, for all their immortality, cannot help but be fascinated by the courage of one who refuses to yield, who finds a way through every storm, who never loses sight of the place where he belongs. On nights such as this, when you listen to the winds outside and wonder at the mysteries of the world, remember that the old stories tell us we are never truly alone. Over every journey, every challenge, the eyes of fate and the whispers of ancient powers still watch and wait. Odysseus's journey is both a story for the ages and a quiet reminder, echoing gently in the night, that even the mightiest are shaped by the tides of fortune, and that hope and endurance can draw the attention of the very gods themselves. On the windswept shores of Ithaca, a quiet ache fills the palace that once rang with song and laughter. Years have slipped by, each season circling back and finding Odysseus still gone, his fate a secret held by the endless sea. In his absence, shadows of gathered uninvited guests fill his halls, feasting on the fruits of his labor, draining the wine cellars, mocking the customs that once kept the household strong. These are the suitors, young nobles from across the islands, drawn by tales of Penelope's beauty and the lure of a vacant throne. They come not to honor, but to consume, to break bread meant for another, to claim what patience and loyalty would await. Each day, they grow more brazen, pressing Penelope to choose among them, devouring the stores of livestock and treating the palace as their own. The delicate order that held Ithaca together begins to fray. Servants pick sides, supplies dwindle, and even the land beyond the palace walls feels the strain. Yet Penelope, the queen at the heart of this storm, endures. Her sorrow is deep, but her spirit deeper still. For years she has guarded the hope of her husband's return, weaving by day and unweaving by night, spinning a shroud for Laertes, Odysseus's father, and with it, spinning delay. With every pass of the shuttle, she buys more Timino just for herself, but for Ithaca itself, for the fragile line that keeps her son Telemachus safe. She becomes legend even in her own lifetime, not only for her beauty or her fidelity, but for the cunning that echoes her absent husband's gifts. Each dawn, she faces the suitors with composure and courtesy, hiding her dread behind a veil of formality, always searching their faces for some sign of mercy, always keeping her true feelings just out of reach. Telemachus, once a boy at her side, now stands on the edge of manhood. For him, Odysseus is more memory than presence, a shape cast in stories and half-remembered gestures, a father who exists mostly in the wishes of others. Yet, as the suitors press harder and the future grows more uncertain, something in Telemachus begins to shift. He senses that his own time is coming, that if Ithaca is to be saved, he must act. The courage he needs is not found in swords or boasting, but in the willingness to face the world as it is, broken, dangerous, and still worth fighting for. Each night he lies awake, listening to the laughter of the suitors echoing down the corridors, wondering what his father would do if he were here, and quietly promising to be ready if that day ever comes. The palace itself, once a symbol of stability and peace, becomes a battleground for every kind of loyalty and betrayal. There are those among the servants who remember Odysseus with tears and keep their faith quietly burning. Eumaeus the swineherd, Philoetius the cowherd, the old nurse Eurycleia who once cradled Odysseus as a child. But others, drawn by fear or self-interest, side with the suitors, hoping to secure their place in a world that seems to have no room left for loyalty or tradition. The palace's great hall, meant for ceremonies, now hosts daily banquets tinged with cruelty and waste. Animals are slaughtered for pleasure, wine is spilled as easily as secrets, and laughter grows mean with each passing day. The walls themselves seem to mourn, holding the silence of what's been lost. Beyond the palace, Ithaca's fields and farms grow tired under the weight of so many hungry mouths. The herds thin, crops go untended, and those who work the land fear what will happen if the suitors remain much longer. Yet the island still remembers its king. The olive groves whisper his name in the wind, and the sea brings news faint, uncertain of ships spotted on distant horizons, of travelers who claim to have seen Odysseus alive. Hope stirs, then falters, as rumors outpace reality and longing is met again and again with disappointment. In the midst of this unraveling, Penelope stands as both shield and target. Her wit protects her son, her patience frustrates her suitors, but her heart suffers in silence. Sometimes, late at night, she allows herself to imagine Odysseus's return, the sudden silence as he steps across the threshold, the terror on the suitors' faces, the embrace that would make the long years of waiting worthwhile. But dreams are fragile, and the dawn always brings the hard light of reality, her weaving to unpick, her household to defend, her son to guide through the maze of growing up in a world where nothing is certain. The crisis in Ithaca is not only a matter of property or power, it is a test of everything that holds a community together: honor, justice, restraint, the memory of shared sacrifices. Without a king, Ithaca drifts. The elders grow old, unwilling or unable to act. The customs that once shaped their world, respect for guests, loyalty to the house, the balance between generosity and order, begin to slip away, and with them, the hope that anything will ever return to what it was. It is into this world, full of tension and quiet heroism, that Odysseus's story will finally return, turning longing into action and sorrow into a path home. For now, as the night deepens and the halls of Ithaca grow quiet except for the muted footsteps of restless dreams, the fate of the kingdom hangs suspended. Every day of waiting sharpens the hunger for restoration. Every small act of faith sows the seeds of eventual reunion. Somewhere beyond the edge of the world, Odysseus still wanders, drawn forward not only by his own hope, but by the strength and loyalty of those who have not forgotten, who keep the lamp burning in the window, and who believe, against all odds, that what is lost can still be found. Beneath a sky heavy with stars, far from the island kingdom that aches for his return, Odysseus sits alone on the shore of an unknown land, his heart caught between worlds. The salt of the sea lingers on his skin, mingling with memories of a distant home he has not seen for so many years. All around him, the sounds of night waves washing stones, wind through cypress and olive, the distant cry of seabirds become a lullaby for a soul stretched thin by longing and endurance. It has been a decade since Troy burned behind him, and every dawn since then has carried him further from the life he once knew. Each sunrise, a reminder that the world of kings and heroes is also a world of loss, uncertainty, and the stubborn refusal to surrender to despair. The journey that began with the fires of Troy was never meant to be so long. Odysseus, clever and cautious, was a man who valued home above glory, who fought for the promise of returning to his wife, his son, and the hard, stony beauty of Ithaca. But the gods, watching from their heights, wove obstacles into his path. His men, once proud warriors, have been scattered and lost to the wind, taken by temptation, by monsters, by their own hunger and impatience. Each disaster is a lesson, each loss, a scar on his spirit, a reminder that home is not simply a place, but a state of being that must be earned again and again. Odysseus's suffering is never just physical. The storm-tossed seas, the shipwrecks, the islands ruled by dangerous enchantresses and vengeful gods, all test his will and his cunning, but it is the loneliness that threatens to undo him. On the island of Calypso, Time itself seems to stand still. The nymph offers him immortality and a life free from sorrow, but for Odysseus, it is a golden cage. Day after day he sits on the shore, gazing at the horizon, the endless blue that separates him from everything that matters. Even paradise becomes a prison when it demands the surrender of identity, of the connections that make a man who he is. Yet, it is not only on distant shores that Odysseus is tested. In the silent hours between each trial, he carries within him the weight of choices made and regrets that cannot be erased. There are moments fleeting, piercing when he wonders if Ithaca remembers him, if Penelope's faith has endured, if Telemachus has grown strong enough to defend what is theirs. These questions cut deeper than any wound, and it is in answering them, in refusing to give up hope, that Odysseus's true heroism shines brightest. For every trial he endures, every temptation he overcomes, is for the sake of return. He is not a conqueror in search of new lands, but a wanderer desperate to reclaim his own. While the world sleeps, Odysseus moves quietly through lands of shadow and dream, guided by Athena's subtle hand and by his own restless mind. When he is lost, it is memory that lights the way, the sound of his son's laughter, the feel of Penelope's hand in his, the curve of Ithaca's cliffs rising above the surf. Even in his lowest moments, when Poseidon's anger hurls him from his course, when hunger and fear gnaw at him, it is this memory that keeps him moving forward. The journey becomes not just a battle against the elements, but a struggle to hold on to himself, to what he values most, against the tide of forgetting. Through every ordeal, Odysseus's mind remains sharp, his instincts honed by hardship and necessity. He learns to see opportunity in adversity, to listen for the guidance of the gods in the whispers of the wind or the flight of birds. The cunning that once won him victories in war now serves him in the struggle to survive. He becomes a master of disguise and deception, a man who can slip through the world unnoticed when he must, who can be both nobody and king, both beggar and hero. His identity is always shifting, but at the core remains the unbreakable desire to return. There are moments when the line between mortal and immortal seems to blur, when the touch of a goddess or the gift of prophecy lifts Odysseus beyond the ordinary. Yet even these encounters, wondrous and terrifying, reinforce his longing for the simple joys of human life, a meal shared with loved ones, the comfort of familiar voices, the security of knowing one's place in the world. Each miraculous escape, each night spent beneath strange stars, is a reminder of how fragile happiness can be, how easily the things we love slip through our fingers if we are not careful. As the years pass, the journey becomes as much an inward odyssey as a physical one. Odysseus is forced to reckon with his own limits, to confront his pride, his anger, the choices that have cost him so much. He remembers the faces of those he could not save, the trust betrayed by a careless word or a moment of arrogance. Yet for all his flaws, he does not allow them to define him. Each setback becomes fuel for the journey, each sorrow, another thread woven into the story of his return. Even the gods, with all their power, are moved by his endurance. Athena, watching from the shadows, becomes his most faithful ally, intervening at the moments when hope seems most distant, guiding his thoughts, shaping his dreams. She admires not only his cleverness, but his capacity for growth, his willingness to learn from suffering rather than let it make him bitter. For in Odysseus, the gods see what is finest and most enduring in mortal nature, the ability to struggle, to adapt, to hope when there is no reason to hope. With every passing season, the call of home grows louder. Odysseus's wanderings, though marked by adventure and hardship, become a crucible in which the essence of his character is revealed. He learns the value of patience, the strength that comes from humility, the necessity of trusting others and of accepting help when it is given. He becomes not only a king in exile, but a man remade by experience, wiser, deeper, more fully himself. Somewhere across the sea, Ithaca waits. Penelope weaves her shroud, Telemachus grows into manhood, the suitors press their suit, and the island holds its breath. Every night that Odysseus survives, Every dawn that finds him still striving brings him closer to the moment when his journey will end not with the fanfare of conquest, but with the quiet joy of coming home. It is this hope, fragile and yet indestructible, that carries him onward through storm and sorrow, through dream and waking. In his story, we find our own longing for return, our own faith that no journey is ever truly hopeless, as long as we remember where we belong. In the dim hush before dawn, Ithaca lies shrouded in mist, its fields silent, its palace slumbering under the weight of years without a king. For those within its halls, the day ahead seems much like any other a day of uneasy feasting, of suitors boasting and plotting, of Penelope moving through her grief and her clever rituals, of servants treading carefully between hope and fear. But on this day, everything changes. Far across the restless sea, a miracle is unfolding. On a quiet shore, a ship glides through the surf, propelled not by oars or sails, but by the will of the gods. On its deck, Odysseus lies sleeping, cradled in dreams and in the promise of homecoming that for so long seemed impossible. The journey that brought him here has not been simple. In the courts of the Phaeacians, he has found both refuge and recognition, welcomed by King Alcinous and Queen Arete, celebrated as a guest of honor. Their palace, shining with gold and marble, stands as an island of civility in a world made wild by storms and sorrow. Here, for the first time in years, Odysseus has been able to let his story unfold, to sit among strangers and reveal the truth of his sufferings, his wanderings, and his relentless desire to return to the world he loves. In the flicker of torchlight, his tale takes shape, the trials of his men, the terrors of monsters and enchantresses, the losses that still haunt him, and the cunning that has become both his curse and his salvation. As the Phaeacians listen, something shifts within their hearts. They are moved by the dignity of his suffering, the humility with which he speaks of glory and defeat, the grace with which he mourns his dead. When his tale is done, there are no more questions, only a sense that they have witnessed something secrete a man, remade by adversity, forged by longing, burning with the undimmed hope of return. In gratitude and awe, the Phaeacians load his ship with gifts, bronze and gold, woven garments, treasures beyond price. Then, in silence, they carry Odysseus aboard, setting him gently among his riches, letting sleep wash over him like a blessing. By dawn, they reach Ithaca's shore. Without a word, they lift Odysseus from the ship, lay him upon the sand, and vanish into the mist, leaving behind only the faint echo of oars and the quiet breathing of a king restored to his land. When Odysseus awakens, the world is new and strange. The land he has dreamed of for so many years lies hidden behind a veil of morning fog. He rises, unsure if he has been betrayed by the gods or if the dream of return was only that a dream. But as the mist lifts, the familiar contours of Ithaca emerge, the olive trees, the distant hills, the scent of earth after rain. Still, caution is Odysseus's nature. Before he claims his home, he must know if all is as he left it, if the world he has suffered for is ready to receive him once more. Into this moment of uncertainty steps Athena, goddess of wisdom, his companion and protector throughout the long years of wandering. She appears first as a shepherd, then reveals herself, her eyes gleaming with the promise of recognition and alliance. She tells him the truth. The suitors are still in his palace. Penelope still waits. Telemachus has grown, but is threatened at every turn. There is danger, but there is also opportunity. Together, they devise a plan. Athena transforms Odysseus, drawing the years onto his face, stooping his shoulders, dressing him in rags so that none will know the king has returned. It is not time yet for triumph. First comes patience, observation, the gathering of allies, and the measuring of enemies. The greatest tests are those closest to home, carrying nothing but a staff, his true identity hidden beneath the guise of age and poverty. Odysseus sets out across the rocky paths of Ithaca. He seeks shelter with Eumaeus, his loyal swineherd, a man whose kindness and humility stand in sharp contrast to the greed and arrogance of those now feasting in the palace. Eumaeus welcomes the stranger, offering food and fire, telling stories of the kingdom's decline and the endless hope that Odysseus will return. Listening quietly, the king learns more than he could from any proclamation or display of power. It is in these small acts of generosity, in the memory of shared suffering, that he sees what is worth saving and who will stand by his side when the final reckoning comes. Elsewhere, Telemachus too is making his way home, having journeyed far in search of news of his father. Warned by Athena of the suitors' plot to ambush him at sea, he returns in secret, guided by the same longing that drives Odysseus. Fate brings father and son together at Eumaeus's hut. There, at last, the years of longing and loss collapse in a moment of recognition and embrace. Odysseus, his disguise briefly lifted by Athena's touch, stands revealed before his son. At first, Telemachus cannot believe the grief has gone too deep, the years too long. But as the truth dawns, father and son are united, their tears falling for all that has been lost, and all that can now be reclaimed. Yet this reunion is not the end, but a new beginning. Odysseus and Telemachus begin to plan the restoration of their home, counting their allies and their risks, weaving together strategy and hope. Theirs is a homecoming not just of the body, but of the spirit, a renewal of trust, of purpose, of all that makes a family whole. For Odysseus, the return is not a sudden leap from exile to throne, but a journey of steps, each one measured, each one an act of faith. He must move through his kingdom unseen, testing the hearts of those he once ruled, learning where the old loyalties remain and where time and fear have worn them away. He visits Argos, his old hunting dog, lying neglected and dying on a heap of refuse. The loyal animal, recognizing his master even in disguise, wags his tail and lets out a faint cry before dying in peace. This small, private recognition moves Odysseus more than words can say, reminding him of all the years stolen by fate and the quiet heroism of those who have waited without reward. Every meeting, every conversation is a step back into himself, a gathering of threads that have frayed but never truly broken. The palace, meanwhile, is a place of festering tension. The suitors revel in their imagined victory, mocking Penelope, plotting Telemachus's death, gorging themselves on the fruits of a kingdom that is not theirs. But beneath the surface, change is coming. Rumors swirl, omens appear, and the uneasy sense grows that the world is about to shift. Penelope, always watchful, senses the stirring of fate, her dreams filled with signs she cannot yet understand. At last, Odysseus, still disguised, enters his own hall, bearing witness to the depth of disorder and the urgent need for restoration. He endures the suitors' mockery, their violence and scorn, all while holding tight to the secret of his true name. In this moment of humility and endurance, he learns more about power and justice than years of kingship could ever teach. He sees who has remained loyal, who has faltered, and who must answer for the suffering they have caused. In the shadows, plans are set in motion. Telemachus prepares, Penelope sets the stage for the final test, and Odysseus watches, waiting for the moment when patience and wisdom will yield to action. The king's homecoming is no single event, but a tapestry of reunions, reckonings, and quiet redemption journey that binds together the pain of exile with the hope of renewal, the sorrow of loss with the joy of return. And as the night deepens over Ithaca, one truth becomes clear. The heart of a hero is measured not only by the distance he travels, but by his ability to find his way back to the people and the place that define him, no matter how many years and trials lie between. The silence that falls over Ithaca after the suitor's blood has soaked the palace floor is the kind that comes only after a storm, a heavy, echoing stillness, broken only by the hushed movements of servants, gathering bodies, the distant weeping of families, and the lingering smell of fire and blood. Justice has come with arrows, but the work of restoration is only beginning. In the battered halls, Odysseus stands at the center of it all, breathing hard, his hands stained with the labor of reclaiming his home. The hall itself, once the scene of gluttony and laughter, now bears the marks of violence and release, the end of a long nightmare. Yet even in victory, Odysseus's heart cannot rest. The wounds left by years of loss and uncertainty, the aching separation from those he loves most deeply, remain unhealed. He knows that before peace can truly settle over his household, something more intimate and fragile must be restored: the bond between himself and Penelope, a reunion not of spectacle, but of the quiet, unspoken knowledge that only two hearts joined by suffering can share. Penelope, still cloistered in her upper chamber, hears the news with a mixture of dread and disbelief. For so long, hope has been a tormentor, sharp ache that she has learned to keep at bay, lest it break her completely. Now, the voices of her son and the old nurse rise with the impossible claim that Odysseus has returned, that he has slain the suitors and reclaimed his place. But Penelope is not quick to trust. Her mind, shaped by years of endurance and cleverness, refuses to surrender to joy without proof. Too many have lied, too many have tried to deceive her with tales of a returning king. She descends the staircase slowly, each step weighted with memories of absence and longing, determined to see with her own eyes what fate has truly brought her. In the hall, Odysseus sits by the fire, washed and dressed in clean robes, his features altered by Athena to appear younger, more regal, yet still somehow unfamiliar after 2 decades apart. Telemachus greets his mother with exultation, urging her to embrace her husband, to let happiness finally return. But Penelope, wise and cautious, holds herself back. She studies Odysseus's face, searching for the unmistakable signs known only to them, memories no impostor could ever possess. She tests him with words, with subtle questions, probing for the truth beneath appearances. Her skepticism is not coldness, but the final act of love, the refusal to allow herself to be shattered by false hope again. Odysseus does not rush to claim her trust. He understands too well the dangers of hasty belief, the scars left by betrayal and loss. He respects her need for certainty, for a sign that can cut through all disguise and doubt. Penelope, in a final, silent test, orders the great marriage bed to be brought from their private chamber into the halla bed, Odysseus himself built around the roots of a living olive tree, impossible to move without tearing the very heart from the palace itself. When Odysseus hears this, he bursts out in wounded anger, protesting that no mortal could move that bed unless a god or a madman had destroyed it. He describes, in loving detail, the construction of the bed, the secret only he and Penelope and a single trusted servant could know. This truth, spoken in a voice that carries all the years of longing and fidelity, finally breaks through Penelope's reserve. In that instant, the barriers built by time and pain collapse. Penelope rushes to her husband, tears streaming down her cheeks, her heart at last free to believe. They cling to each other, bodies and souls entwined, the years of separation melting away in a flood of relief and wonder. The joy of their reunion is not loud or triumphant, but deep, resonant, quiet, the joy of two survivors who have weathered every trial, who have been remade by suffering, and who now find themselves whole once more. For Odysseus, the embrace of his wife is a greater reward than victory in battle or the reclaiming of his throne. For Penelope, it is the return of the world she has guarded in memory, the fulfillment of every hope she dared not speak. Through the night, they share their stories, Odysseus recounting his wanderings, the loss of his companions, the cruelty and mercy of gods and mortals, the moments of despair and the stubborn flame of hope that led him home. Penelope, in turn, reveals the daily siege of the suitors, her ruses and deceptions, the long unraveling and weaving of the shroud, the fear that each day might be her last as queen and mother. Their words are a kind of healing, knitting together the broken threads of time, forging anew the intimacy that absence could not destroy. Athena herself intervenes to lengthen the night, holding back the dawn, so that husband and wife might have their fill of reunion, of the sacred comfort that only comes when hearts are fully known and accepted. Yet peace remains fragile. Even as the household is cleansed and order is restored within the palace walls, the families of the slain suitors gather outside, their grief turning quickly to anger and calls for vengeance. Rumors spread through the city, some mourn the dead, others whisper about omens and the justice of the gods. Still others wonder what kind of king will rise from the blood of so many noble sons. Odysseus, wise to the ways of both men and fate, does not linger in the comfort of his reclaimed throne. Instead, he turns his thoughts to his father, Laertes, who has lived these many years in sorrow and self-imposed exile, mourning a son he believed lost forever. With Telemachus by his side, Odysseus seeks out the old man, finding him working in the orchard, dressed in rags, hands calloused, and face marked by grief. Laertes at first does not recognize the stranger, but Odysseus, unable to bear another moment of separation, reveals himself through words only a father and son could share, naming each tree in the garden, recalling the day each was planted, the promises exchanged in the quiet moments of childhood. At last, recognition dawns, and father and son are reunited, tears and laughter mingling in the dappled shade of olive branches. 3 generations Laertes, Odysseus, Telemachus stand together, the line of kings restored, the memory of suffering transformed into the strength of belonging. But the cycle of vengeance threatens to sweep it all away. The fathers of the suitors gather, demanding retribution for their lost sons, for the blood spilled in the name of justice. As tempers rise and the threat of civil war looms over Ithaca, the gods themselves intervene. Athena, once more acting as protector and peacemaker, descends to impose a final reckoning. She commands both sides to lay down their arms, to let the wounds of the past close, to build peace not on more violence, but on the hard-won understanding of what has been lost and gained. Zeus's thunder rumbles as a warning a new beginning must come, or ruin will return. In the quiet that follows, the first true peace in decades settles over Ithaca. The people, weary of war and mourning, begin the slow work of rebuilding not just the palace or the fields, but the bonds of community and kinship, the shared faith in a future no longer held hostage by absence or fear. Odysseus, at last, can rest not the restless, uneasy sleep of exile, but the deep, abiding peace that comes with knowing that all has been restored. Beside him, Penelope dreams not of loss, but of the days ahead, and Telemachus, now grown into his father's likeness, stands ready to inherit a kingdom, forged in suffering, tempered by wisdom, and held together by love. The story of Odysseus's return ends not with glory or the blare of trumpets, but with the gentle settling of night over a world returned to order. In the hush of restored peace, the king and his family lie together beneath the same roof at last, the world outside turning slowly, softly, toward morning. The long journey home has found its harbor not just in a place, but in the arms of those who waited, believed, and endured. In this final stillness, after so many storms, Ithaca itself seems to breathe again, a home remade, a family restored, a hero at last able to lay down his burdens and surrender to sleep, knowing he is, finally, home. Even as dawn rose over Ithaca and the hush of peace seemed to settle within the palace walls, the ripples of Odysseus's return spread far beyond his household. News of the suitor's bloody fate traveled quickly, whispered at wells, murmured in the streets, carried from farm to farm until it reached every corner of the island. The once comforting familiarity of home was now shadowed by uncertainty. Some saw in Odysseus's return the restoration of justice, the long-awaited end to chaos. Others, particularly the families of the slain young men, could only see tragedy and the empty places at their tables. Grief mingled with rage, and the pain of loss demanded an answer. What right, they asked, did Odysseus have to slaughter their sons, even if those sons had abused the laws of hospitality and usurped his household? The ache of bereavement knows no law but its own. In their sorrow, the fathers and brothers of the suitors gathered, led by Eupeithes, father of Antinous, the first suitor, to fall beneath Odysseus's bow. The assembly met beneath the ancient trees, voices rising, each retelling what had happened from their own vantage, seeking both justice and vengeance. The memory of the suitors' arrogance, their feasting, their disregard for the customs that bound Ithacan society, struggled against the fresh pain of their deaths. Eupides, his face carved by grief and pride, stood at the center, demanding action, his words echoing with a father's pain and a leader's outrage. The dead, he insisted, could not be left unavenged. Odysseus had returned not as a king seeking reconciliation, but as an avenger, bringing death and sorrow to noble families. Others spoke more cautiously, remembering the years of lawlessness, the way the suitors had squandered Odysseus's wealth and threatened Penelope and Telemachus. Some counseled patience, a return to order, but the thirst for vengeance grew hotter with each telling. Meanwhile, in the peaceful shade of his orchard, Odysseus stood with his father and son, savoring the first taste of belonging after so many years of drifting. Laertes, once bowed by age and sorrow, felt the weight of grief lift as he embraced the living proof that his son had returned, whole and victorious. Telemachus, newly tested by adversity and bloodshed, looked to his father and grandfather with the eyes of a man ready to take his place in the line of kings. But peace, so recently won, was already under threat. Rumors reached them of the gathering host, the stirrings of civil strife, and Odysseus's heart, always attuned to danger, grew heavy once more. Would the gods allow yet another round of violence to tear Ithaca apart, just as peace seemed possible? Athena, watching from the heights of Olympus, saw the coming storm and knew that mortal wisdom alone could not avert disaster. Disguised once more, she came swiftly to Laertes' side, filling the old man's limbs with strength and resolve. She urged Odysseus to stand ready, to gather his allies and prepare for whatever would come. The two sides approached each other, Odysseus with his small band, strengthened by Athena's promise of aid, the angry kinsmen of the suitors, armed and resolved, advancing with shouts and the clatter of spears. Tension thrummed in the air as they faced each other in the open field, beneath the wide, watching sky. Laertes, feeling his youth return with every breath, lifted his spear and stood at Odysseus's side, the memory of past battles burning bright once more. It was Laertes who struck first, his throw guided by Athena's hand. Eupides fell, pierced through the helmet, and for a moment the old ways seemed ready to repeat themselves, grief answered by death, vengeance by fresh wounds. But as cries of fury rose on both sides, Athena revealed herself in her glory, her voice ringing with the authority of Olympus. "Enough," she commanded, her words freezing both armies in their tracks. "Lay down your arms. Let not Ithaca be torn by blood any longer." In that charged silence, Zeus sent a sign thunder cracking from a clear sky, a reminder that mortal affairs must yield, at last, to the order of the gods. Gradually, the fury in men's hearts ebbed, replaced by exhaustion and a wary, reluctant understanding. The vision of endless vengeance lost its power. The need for healing grew more urgent. Old men recalled the lessons of their fathers, that peace, however fragile, must be grasped when offered, lest ruin swallow all that remained. Athena, her eyes bright with the wisdom of centuries, bound both sides to an oath pact of peace, sworn before gods and men. No more blood would be shed for the suitors' deaths. Those who remained would accept Odysseus as king, and he, in turn, would rule with mercy, restoring justice and the bonds of kinship broken by years of strife. The transition from violence to peace was not simple. The wounds of war and betrayal linger at emptied homes, unhealed hearts, memories of what had been lost. Yet the work of rebuilding began, slowly at first, with hesitant gestures of reconciliation. Odysseus walked among his people, receiving both gratitude and stares of suspicion. He made offerings to the gods, honoring the dead and appeasing the living. Penelope emerged from the palace, her dignity restored, and with her presence, the women of Ithaca found their voices again, weaving together the new order with patient, deliberate care. Telemachus, once a boy overshadowed by absence and uncertainty, now stood at his father's side, learning to govern, to listen, to heal old rifts with the promise of renewal. In the seasons that followed, Ithaca slowly returned to itself. The fields were tended, flocks restored, the laughter of children echoing where once there had been only silence. The scars of violence faded not forgotten, but woven into the island's memory, a lesson for future generations. Odysseus's homecoming, once marked by blood and arrows, became a story told in the flicker of hearthfires, a story not only of war and cunning, but of endurance, forgiveness, and the deep, abiding hunger for peace. Athena, watching from afar, was pleased. Her favorite had been tested and had prevailed, not by force alone, but by learning the greater strength found in mercy. Odysseus, scarred and wise, at last found what he had sought through every trial and temptation, not merely the return to his homeland, but the restoration of harmony, the healing of all that makes a place worthy to be called home. In the long, gentle evenings that followed, as the wind moved softly through the olive trees and the stars shone over the quiet sea, the people of Ithaca slept secure in the knowledge that, after so many storms, they were, at last, at peace. As the hush of peace settled over Ithaca, the work of true homecoming had only just begun. The story of Odysseus does not simply end with the defeat of the suitors and the forging of a fragile truce. It unfolds into quieter but deeper trials that measure the fullness of his return and the cost of 20 lost years. With the blood of vengeance washed from the palace floors, the night brought reunion, but the dawn revealed what it truly means to reclaim a life left behind for so long. For Penelope, who had waited with patient cunning and iron self-control, the moment of recognition was both fulfillment and risk. The years of absence had carved deep channels of doubt and habit, and Odysseus himself was not the man who left for Troy, nor was she the young wife he had once known. Their eyes searched each other's faces for traces of the past, for the living soul behind the scars, for the partner whose presence had been memory and hope more than flesh. To test what lay between them, Penelope proposed a secret signer riddle of the bed that only her true husband could solve. Odysseus, quick in mind as always, spoke of the olive tree, rooted at the heart of their chamber, the living post around which he had built their marriage bed with his own hands. The words unlocked her heart, and she wept with joy and grief, running to embrace him, their tears mingling for all that had been lost and all that was, miraculously, restored. In the intimacy of that night, their stories unwound side by side. He spoke of storms and shipwrecks, of the lotus and the cyclops, of enchantresses and underworld shadows, of the edge of despair and the stubborn pull of home. She revealed how she had spun and unraveled, how she had navigated the suffocating press of suitors, the loneliness, the terror for her son, the slow corrosion of hope, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. With each story, they rethreaded the tapestry of their marriage, closing the gap of years and making sense of the suffering. Yet even as dawn approached, a gentle dread lingered, for Odysseus knew the demands of fate were not yet satisfied. The next morning, even as the island stirred with rumors and reckonings, Odysseus remembered the prophecy spoken by Tiresias in the realm of the dead. The seer had warned him that, even after peace was restored to his house, he must undertake a journey inland carrying an oar to a place so far from the sea that the people would mistake it for a winnowing fan. Only then, after planting the oar and making sacrifice to Poseidon, could he truly appease the god who had shadowed his voyage. Odysseus, shaped by obedience to the gods as much as by his own restless mind, prepared himself for this final act. But first, there was one more wound to heal, a wound not of politics or marriage, but of blood and kinship. His father, Laertes, still lived, but rumor had it that the old man had wasted away on his farm, refusing all comfort, overcome by the years of sorrow. Odysseus set out from the palace with Telemachus at his side, journeying through the olive groves and stony fields that had been the backbone of his kingdom. The land was rich with the scent of earth and ripening fruit, but for Laertes, the world had grown small and grey, reduced to a patch of soil, a few neglected trees, and the ache of memory. When Odysseus found his father, he approached him not as a son, but as a stranger, testing the old man's strength and spirit. Laertes, weathered and weary, spoke with heavy heart of his lost son, of the years of waiting, of the hope that would not die, but brought no comfort. At last, unable to hold back the truth, Odysseus revealed himself, proving his identity by recalling every tree his father had given him as a boy, each olive and fig and pear planted as a promise for the future. The recognition was like a second homecoming, the healing of a rift deeper than the sea. Father and son embraced in the dust of the orchard, tears streaking faces carved by time and trial, and the chain of generations was restored. 3 men now stood together, Laertes, Odysseus, and Telemachus, lineage fractured by war and wandering, but made whole again. Yet even in this moment of private joy, the threat of fresh violence loomed. The relatives of the slain suitors, stirred by grief and wounded pride, plotted vengeance, unwilling to accept peace so easily. The tension between justice and forgiveness, between law and blood, trembled in the summer air. Athena, ever watchful, guided events with a firm but subtle hand. As the would-be avengers advanced on Odysseus and his kin, battle seemed inevitable. It was only by the intervention of the gods a flash of Athena's presence, a thunderbolt from Zeus that fighting was halted, and the fragile peace sealed by divine will. Now, at last, the long process of healing could truly begin. Odysseus resumed his place as king, not through force but through the slow, patient work of restoration. He traveled across Ithaca, listening to the grievances of his people, making recompense where it was due, reaffirming bonds with those who had remained loyal. The palace, once filled with noise and excess, was restored to dignity and order. Penelope, at his side, ruled the household with wisdom and grace, her presence a living reminder of fidelity's power. Telemachus, shaped by ordeal and example, stepped into his new role as prince, the future of Ithaca brightening with each passing season. Yet Odysseus himself was not quite at rest. The memory of Poseidon's wrath, of the prophecy unfulfilled, tugged at him like a distant current. He waited until the wounds of the island had begun to heal, until the laughter of children and the rhythms of daily life had returned, before setting out on his inland pilgrimage. Carrying an oar across his shoulder, he walked far from the coast, through fields and villages where the taste of salt and the cry of gulls were unknown. When at last he reached a place where no one recognized the tool of the sea, and a farmer mistook his oar for a threshing fan, Odysseus knew the time had come. He planted the oar deep in the earth, made sacrifice as the gods had commanded, and prayed for forgiveness for himself, for his crew, for all whose lives had been shaped by the whims of gods and the longing for home. With that final act, the circle was complete. The sea that had once been his adversary was at last appeased, and Odysseus was truly free to live out his days in peace, among those he loved and those who loved him. The lessons of his journey of endurance and cunning, of loss and reconciliation, of the necessity of letting go, as well as the courage to hold on were, passed down to his son, and to the sons and daughters of Ithaca, who grew up in the shelter of his restored kingdom. The story of Odysseus became not only a tale of wandering, but a lesson, in return, how to pick up the pieces of a life after upheaval, how to rebuild trust and harmony after chaos, how to be made whole after being broken. And as the years unfolded, and the olive trees grew thick and strong around the palace, the people of Ithaca found themselves guided not only by the memory of war, but by the hope of peace, the kind of peace hard won and deeply treasured, the kind that grows in quiet hearts and well-tended fields, long after the songs of heroes have faded into legend. It begins on a windless, glowing day as the sun leans over the calm Ionian Sea, painting the world with gold. In the palace of Ithaca, the long silence after the cleansing of blood and the reunion of lost loves hangs in the air. But beneath the quiet, a ripple of unrest stirs among the island's people, particularly in the families who have lost sons, brothers, and fathers among the suitors. For them, justice is not yet served, grief demands an answer. Whispers travel across the rocky fields and narrow lanes, pooling in the darkened corners of simple homes, until at last the fathers and brothers of the dead gather beneath the shade of old olive trees to make a choice. Will they let the cycle of vengeance continue, or will they seek peace for a land already scarred by so much loss? Odysseus, who has spent so long navigating the unpredictable currents of fate, senses the trouble rising before it reaches his ears. He stands on the threshold of his home, watching Telemachus at his side, Penelope tending the rituals within, and Laertes returning to the habits of the land. In this delicate moment, the fragile unity of Ithaca is tested. The story that began with the longing for home now becomes a lesson in what it means to stay home, to repair, and to forgive. As the sun climbs higher, the leaders of the aggrieved families assemble. Euphites, father of Antinous, the first suitor to fall to Odysseus's bow, is their spokesman. His voice is raw with grief, his heart burning with the belief that justice must be won through retribution. Yet even as he calls for arms, there are those who hesitate, men who remember the wildness that swept over the island during the suitors' rule, who recall the feasting, the waste, and the erosion of order. Some counsel patience, suggesting that the gods themselves have judged and resolved this feud, but anger is a tide that can be hard to turn. Word of the gathering spreads quickly. Athena, who has guided Odysseus with invisible hands since Troy, watches with immortal attention, her heart weighing the scales of fate. In her wisdom, she knows that lasting peace must be chosen, not imposed by force or fear. Disguised as mentor, the trusted friend of Odysseus, she moves quietly among the people, encouraging the voices of restraint, urging the fathers and sons to remember the suffering that vengeance brings. Odysseus, meanwhile, does not shrink from the possibility of renewed conflict. He arms himself once more, not with the wild recklessness of a young warrior, but with the grim resolve of a man who has learned the price of violence. He gathers his few loyal friends, Telemachus and Laertes among them, and prepares for confrontation not in hope of glory, but in readiness to defend what has finally been restored. The shadow of battle lengthens, stretching across fields where peace has barely taken root. On a dusty road at the island's edge, the two groups meet. The tension is as taut as a drawn bow, each side waiting for the other to speak or to act. For a moment, the world holds its breath, suspended between ruin and renewal. It is then, at the brink, that Athena steps forward, her divine presence veiled but unmistakable to those with eyes to see. Her voice is not thunder but reason, not command but invitation. She calls for the anger to subside, for memory to soften, for the ancient customs of kin and hospitality to take precedence over blood debt. A sign appears, a flash of light, a sound like distant thunder, and the men, suddenly aware of the gods' attention, let their weapons fall. The voice of Zeus himself rumbles through the air, commanding peace. In that instant, the fever of vengeance breaks. The people look around, blinking in the clear sunlight, seeing not enemies but neighbors, not rivals but fellow survivors of years of chaos and pain. The decision to accept peace is not easy. It is a choice made in the teeth of grief and pride. But one by one, the fathers and brothers lower their arms, and the ground, for so long watered by tears and blood, is spared another harvest of sorrow. Odysseus, who has survived monsters and gods, stands humbled before the will of the immortals and the hard-won wisdom of his people. He offers words not of triumph, but of sorrow for what has been lost, and a vow to lead with justice in the years ahead. Ithaca, at last, breathes out the tension that has haunted it since Odysseus first sailed for Troy. The restoration of peace is not a single moment, but a slow unfolding series of gestures, apologies, and understandings. Odysseus walks the land, making amends, redistributing his wealth, ensuring the needs of the wounded and the grieving are met. He honors the dead, not only his own but the suitors as well, ordering proper rites so that restless spirits may find the peace denied them in life. The palace, once echoing with the noise of unwanted guests, fills with the sounds of daily life, children at play, the clatter of pots, the quiet music of weaving and song. The fields, left untended during the years of disorder, are planted anew, and olive trees once again spread their branches in the sun. Penelope and Odysseus find their rhythm as partners, ruling together with mutual respect, each strengthened by what they endured apart. Telemachus, grown wise before his time, steps into his role as the future of Ithaca, bridging the generations and healing old divides. The lessons of this final reckoning linger long after the memory of battle fades. Ithaca learns that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the choice to move forward, to rebuild, and to forgive. The story of Odysseus, once told as an epic of adventure, becomes a living guide for the generations that follow, a story of endurance, restoration, and the deep, enduring courage it takes to lay down arms and create a home where all may rest at last. And as the stars wheel over the island and the olive groves rustle in the gentle night wind, the people of Ithaca settle once more into the hopeful quiet of a future reclaimed from the storm. In the hush that follows the storms of vengeance and reunion, Ithaca stands at last in the first full light of peace. But the journey is not truly over. For even after blood has been washed from the palace stones, even after Odysseus and Penelope have shared their night of recognition and retold the stories of 20 years apart, the tale still lingers on the lips of the island's people, rippling outward through memory, rumor, and quiet reflection. What becomes of a hero once the monsters are gone? The gods have receded into silence, and the old wounds begin, slowly, to heal. What does home mean, when home itself has been transformed by absence and return, by grief and forgiveness, by the inexorable passage of time? In the gentle days that follow the divine intervention, the land begins to knit itself back together. The fields, left fallow and wild, are turned by steady hand, some of them, the very same that once bore arms against neighbors. The sheep are counted and the herds restored. Olive trees are pruned, and new growth springs up alongside the scars of the old. The palace bustles not with feasts of predatory guests, but with careful order, shared laughter, and the songs of the servants as they sweep out the dust of violence. And every day, Penelope sits at her loom once more, but now she weaves not as a shield against despair, but as a creator of beauty and legacy, each thread a mark of persistence and hope. For Odysseus, the world has shifted. The man who wandered through lands of enchantresses and cannibals, who saw the world's edge and the shadows of the dead, now finds his trials transformed into memories that surface in quiet moments. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he lies awake beside Penelope, listening to the wind in the olive branches, feeling the weight of all he has gained and lost. He remembers his men, their laughter, their faults, the way they vanished one by one into the jaws of fate. He thinks of the gods, of Athena's guidance, of Poseidon's implacable rage, and wonders at the strange, unpredictable current of destiny that brought him both suffering and salvation. He learns, slowly, that being home does not mean the end of longing. It means living with the knowledge of all the roads not taken, the faces that will never return, the choices that cannot be undone. Telemachus, too, walks a new path. No longer the uncertain youth who watched strangers devour his inheritance, he is tempered by his travels, by the dangers he faced and the father he found. He begins to take his place among the elders, listening, learning, and lending his strength to rebuild the shaken order of the island. Sometimes, he visits the orchards with Laertes, learning the names and lore of every tree, letting the lessons of old age and endurance settle into his bones. Other times, he sits beside Penelope, hearing stories of her youth, her cleverness, her courage, seeing her not only as his mother, but as a woman who held a kingdom together with nothing but patience, intelligence, and love. Penelope herself grows into her power in new ways. For years, she was a figure of waiting, a beacon of fidelity. Now, with Odysseus at her side, she becomes a counselor and partner, not merely a symbol but a voice in the shaping of the future. She welcomes the loyal servants back into the heart of the household, rewards those who stood firm, and oversees the marriages of maids and farmhands, bringing joy back into a palace too long haunted by uncertainty. In the evenings, when the lamps are lit and the household gathers to share bread and wine, she finds comfort in the simple rituals that once seemed so precarious, knowing, at last, that the thread of her life has come full circle. Laertes, aged and worn by grief, begins to set down his burdens. He accepts his son's return as a gift from the gods, a final chapter he had not dared hope for. The land, which had been his solace in sorrow, now becomes a place of reunion and teaching. He passes on the secrets of grafting trees, of tending vineyards, of reading the sky for signs of weather. As 3 generations walk together in the garden, the wounds of absence begin to close not erased, but woven into the fabric of memory and belonging. Beyond the palace, the people of Ithaca reclaim their own destinies. Old rivalries are put to rest, and new friendships are formed over shared work and common purpose. Festivals return, and the gods are honored with sacrifice and song, not out of fear, but gratitude. The bards sing once more in the halls, telling not only of Odysseus's wanderings, but of Penelope's patience, Telemachus's courage, and the resilience of a people who have survived the collapse of order. Children learn these tales as lessons, as warnings, as inspirations, a living thread tying past to future. But Odysseus's story is not entirely finished. In the quiet dawns, he remembers the prophecy of Tiresias, the old seer who foretold another journey, a journey not across the sea, but deep into the heartland of unknown places. There will come a day, Tiresias warned, when Odysseus must travel far from the shore, carrying an oar on his shoulder, until he meets people who know nothing of the sea and mistake the oar for a winnowing fan. There, he must plant the oar and offer sacrifice to Poseidon, seeking at last to heal the final rift between himself and the god of earthquakes. Only then will he find peace that endures beyond his own lifetime. This vision of a journey yet to come lingers in Odysseus's heart, not as a burden, but as an acknowledgement that even the greatest stories do not end. They ripple onward, through new tasks, new generations, new hopes. Each morning, as the sun climbs over Ithaca's hills, Odysseus walks among his people, greeting them by name, learning again the meaning of community. Sometimes, travelers arrive from distant lands, seeking hospitality. They are welcomed, feasted, and listened to with curiosity and respect, for the people of Ithaca know, better than most, the power of kindness to strangers, the unpredictability of fate, and the enduring call of home. So the tale of Odysseus does not conclude with a final victory, but with a return to the everyday, the tasks and joys and sorrows that make up a human life. The gods may withdraw to their mountain, and the songs of bards may fade at the end of the feast, but the lessons of the long journey remain. The courage to endure, the wisdom to forgive, the humility to accept loss, and the generosity to share one's blessings. These are the legacies that outlast war and wandering, monsters and magic. And when night falls on the island, when sleep drapes the world in gentle shadow, the story continues, passed from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor, echoing across the centuries as softly as the sea itself, inviting all who listen to dream of their own safe harbor, their own long-awaited dawn.